Alex had always been drawn to the idea of escaping reality through virtual experiences. As a teenager, they had sunk countless hours into games that promised rich, immersive worlds, but nothing had ever come close to feeling real. That was until Lifeblood, the most highly anticipated game of the decade, was announced. The developers claimed they had broken the final barrier, a completely immersive virtual reality experience that promised players the ability to live in a world so realistic that it would feel indistinguishable from the real thing. There were rumors swirling about the game's intensity, whispers of strange incidents reported by beta testers, and even a few hushed claims of players disappearing. But Alex dismissed the gossip as just that, gossip. Hype, the kind of viral marketing that only made the game more tantalizing. When the invitation arrived in their inbox, an exclusive chance to be one of the first to try Lifeblood, Alex didn't hesitate. They had spent years chasing the next big thing, and this was it. On the day of the launch, Alex arrived at the nondescript warehouse where the event was being held. The building was sterile and cold, its gray concrete walls towering over the handful of excited players standing outside, all of them buzzing with the same eager anticipation. There was something a little off about the place, Alex thought, but the excitement drowned out their unease. Inside, the space was minimalistic, with sleek black pods lined up in a neat row, each with a headset waiting to transport them into the game. An attendant approached Alex with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're going to love this," she said, guiding them to one of the pods. Her fingers brushed Alex's wrist briefly, sending a shiver down their spine. "You'll feel a slight disorientation at first," the attendant explained as Alex slid into the pod. "But it will pass quickly. Don't be alarmed if it feels too real. That's the beauty of Lifeblood." Alex nodded, eager to begin, and lowered the headset over their eyes. For a moment, there was nothing but darkness. Then, without warning, the world around them exploded into color. The game opened with a familiar title screen, but there was something strange about the way it seemed to bleed into Alex's mind, as if the words themselves were seeping into their consciousness. They could almost feel the texture of the letters. "Welcome to Lifeblood," a disembodied voice echoed through the virtual space. It was soothing, inviting, like slipping into a warm bath. "Your journey begins now." The world materialized around Alex, and they found themselves standing on the edge of a dense forest, the smell of pine and damp earth filling their senses. It was staggering how real it all felt, so much more vivid than any other game they'd ever played. They reached out to touch a tree, half expecting their hand to pass through it like in older VR games. Instead, their fingers brushed rough bark. A bird flew overhead, casting a shadow that moved in perfect synchrony with the rustling leaves. "This is incredible," Alex whispered to themselves, heart pounding with excitement. They could hear the distant rush of water, the soft buzz of insects in the undergrowth. A prompt appeared before their eyes, guiding them to their first task: find the source of the echoes. "Classic," Alex muttered, rolling their eyes. Every adventure game began with some sort of vague objective to lure the player in. But they didn't mind. They were eager to explore, to lose themselves in this world. The forest path wound deeper into the trees, and as Alex ventured further, the sunlight dimmed. The canopy above grew thicker, blocking out the sky. The air grew colder, too, so cold that Alex could see their breath misting in the air. The first unsettling twinge of doubt began to creep into their mind. Had the developers really gone this far to simulate temperature? A low, rhythmic sound began to reverberate through the trees. It was almost imperceptible at first, like a distant hum. Alex stopped, straining to listen. The sound was growing louder, more distinct, an eerie, echoing chant, as if a chorus of voices was whispering just beyond the next bend in the path. They hesitated. There was something deeply wrong about the sound, a primal instinct urging them to turn back, but the pull of the game was too strong. Curiosity always won out. Alex pressed forward. The path grew darker still, until it was almost impossible to see. Shapes moved in the shadows, just at the edge of their vision, flitting too fast to catch. The chant grew louder, more insistent, and Alex's heart began to race, a trickle of fear seeping into their excitement. This was what they had wanted, right? Immersion? The thrill of the unknown? But this felt wrong. Suddenly, the forest opened into a clearing. In the center, a massive stone altar stood, bathed in a sickly, pale light. Surrounding the altar were figures, twisted, humanoid shapes draped in tattered robes. Their faces were obscured by darkness, their bodies unnaturally thin and elongated, as though someone had stretched their skin too tight over their bones. They stood still as statues, their heads tilted at unnatural angles as if listening intently. Alex froze, their breath catching in their throat. This was no longer fun. This was no longer a game. A chill ran down their spine, and for the first time, they considered logging out. But as they reached up to remove the headset, a jolt of electricity shot through their arm, paralyzing them. The prompt flashed in their vision again. Find the source of the echoes. The chanting grew deafening, a cacophony of voices all around them, inside their head, pressing against their skull. Panic set in. Alex tried to scream, but no sound escaped their lips. They were trapped in the clearing, trapped in the game, with no way to escape. The figures began to move. Slowly, unnervingly, they shifted closer to the altar, their robes rustling like dry leaves. As they moved, the light around the clearing flickered and dimmed, casting long, distorted shadows that twisted and writhed like living things. The chanting became a single, guttural roar, a noise so intense that it made Alex's vision blur. One of the figures stepped forward, its face still hidden in shadow. It reached out a spindly hand, pointing directly at Alex. The ground beneath them trembled, and the trees around the clearing groaned as if they were alive. Roots began to writhe and slither across the earth, creeping toward Alex's feet. No, Alex gasped, struggling against the invisible force that held them in place. This isn't real. This can't be real. The figure took another step forward, and in that moment, the chanting stopped. Silence fell over the clearing, heavy and oppressive. The figure's hand, still outstretched, flickered like static on a broken screen. It was glitching, and then the voice returned. This is real enough. Before Alex could process the words, the ground beneath them split open with a deafening crack, and they were swallowed by darkness. Alex's world went black as they tumbled into the abyss, their body weightless, spinning in the void. For what felt like an eternity, there was nothing, no sound, no sensation, just the oppressive darkness pressing in on all sides. They were falling deeper and deeper. But to where? The forest, the figures, the altar. They all seemed distant now, like fragments of a half-remembered dream. But then, as suddenly as it had begun, the sensation of falling stopped. Alex was no longer weightless. They felt solid ground beneath their feet, though the darkness remained. A thick, suffocating silence wrapped around them, punctuated only by the faint, rapid thudding of their own heartbeat in their ears. With trembling hands, Alex reached up to the VR headset, desperate to remove it. This had gone too far. There had to be a way out. But as their fingers touched the edges of the visor, they froze. The smooth plastic casing of the headset was gone. Their fingers brushed only skin. It was as if the headset had melted into their face, fused with their very being. A wave of panic surged through them. They clawed at their face, desperate to pull something, anything, off, but there was nothing to grip. Just skin, smooth and unbroken, as though the headset had never existed. This isn't possible, Alex stammered, their voice barely a whisper in the oppressive darkness. They felt their chest tighten, fear constricting their breath. This is still the game. It has to be. But a tiny, creeping doubt wormed its way into their thoughts. What if this wasn't the game anymore? What if they had crossed some invisible line between reality and fantasy, and now there was no going back? The silence was broken by a low, guttural sound, like the rasp of a breath drawn through decayed lungs. Alex froze, every nerve in their body on edge. The sound came again, closer this time. It was followed by the faint shuffle of something moving just beyond their line of sight. Alex's heart raced, pounding painfully against their ribs. Their eyes darted through the darkness, but they could see nothing. Only the suffocating blackness remained. Then, out of the corner of their eye, they caught a glimpse of movement, a flicker just at the edge of perception. Something was there, lurking in the shadows. "No," they whispered, backing away instinctively. But there was nowhere to go. The ground beneath them felt uneven, as if they stood on the edge of some great precipice. Each step back brought the unsettling sensation that they might fall again, deeper into the dark unknown. Then, without warning, the air around them seemed to shudder, as though reality itself was quivering on the brink of collapse. The blackness split open, like a seam torn in the fabric of the world, and a dim, reddish glow began to seep through. The light was weak at first, but it grew stronger, illuminating the space around Alex. They found themselves standing in a vast, cavernous room. The walls were made of rough-hewn stone, slick with moisture and streaked with some unidentifiable dark substance. The air was thick with the stench of rot and decay, a sickening odor that clung to the back of Alex's throat. And there, in the center of the room, was the source of the glow, a massive, pulsating structure, like the twisted roots of some ancient, monstrous tree. Its veins throbbed with an unnatural, crimson light that bathed the room in a hellish glow. The sight of it filled Alex with an inexplicable sense of dread, as though they were staring into the very heart of something malevolent. "What is this?" Alex muttered, their voice trembling. They took a tentative step closer, the soles of their shoes sticking to the slick floor. Every instinct in their bodies screamed for them to turn back, to run, but there was nowhere else to go. As they neared the pulsating structure, they noticed something that made their stomach twist in revulsion. Embedded within the twisted roots were faces, hundreds of them. Twisted, agonized faces, their mouths open in silent screams. The eyes were hollow, dark voids that seemed to follow Alex as they moved, as if they were alive, trapped in some eternal torment. A cold sweat broke out across Alex's skin. This was no longer a game. No game could create something so horrifying, so real. Suddenly, a sharp sound echoed through the cavern, a metallic clang, like the slamming of a door. Alex spun around, searching for the source of the noise, but the cavern was empty, save for the grotesque, pulsating tree and the faces embedded within it. Then, from behind them, came a voice. It was faint at first, barely a whisper, but it grew louder with each passing second. "Help me!" Alex's blood ran cold. The voice was coming from the tree. "Help me!" The voice repeated, more insistent this time. It was a woman's voice, hoarse and broken, as though she had been screaming for hours, perhaps even days. Alex's gaze snapped to one of the faces embedded in the tree. The eyes, those hollow, dark voids, were moving, shifting, as though trying to focus. And the mouth, it was moving. "Help me!" The face gasped, its lips trembling as it formed the words. Alex staggered back, their heart pounding in their chest. "No, no, this can't be real," they muttered to themselves, shaking their head in disbelief. But no matter how hard they tried to convince themselves otherwise, the truth was undeniable. The faces in the tree were alive. "I'm not here. I'm not really here," Alex whispered, their voice shaking. This is just a glitch. This is a part of the game." But deep down, they knew that wasn't true. Suddenly, the cavern began to tremble. The ground beneath Alex's feet quaked violently, and the walls groaned as though they were alive, straining under some unseen pressure. The pulsating tree throbbed faster, its red glow intensifying, casting long, shifting shadows across the stone floor. Without warning, one of the faces in the tree let out a blood-curdling scream, a high-pitched, bone-chilling wail that reverberated through the cavern. Alex clamped their hands over their ears, but it did nothing to muffle the sound. The other faces began to scream as well, their voices joining in a horrifying chorus of agony. Alex stumbled backward, desperate to escape the sound, but there was nowhere to run. The cavern walls were closing in, the grotesque roots of the tree extending toward them like grasping fingers. "I need to wake up," Alex gasped, their breath coming in ragged bursts. I need to wake up now. They squeezed their eyes shut, willing themselves to wake up, to break free of whatever nightmare they had fallen into. But when they opened their eyes again, the cavern was still there. The pulsating tree, the screaming faces, it was all still there. The nightmare was inescapable. And then, through the cacophony of screams, Alex heard something else, a low, rhythmic sound. It was faint at first, barely audible, but it grew louder, more distinct. It was the same sound they had heard in the forest. The chanting. Find the source of the echoes, the voice whispered again, this time echoing through the walls of the cavern itself. Alex spun in a panic, trying to locate the source of the sound, but it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. The walls shifted and distorted, warping like they were made of something fluid. The faces in the trees shrieked louder, their mouths open wide in expressions of pure, unadulterated terror. Suddenly, the ground beneath Alex gave way again, and they were falling into the void once more. But this time, they weren't alone. Dark, shadowy figures writhed in the air around them, their twisted forms reaching out with long, bony fingers, trying to drag Alex down into the depths with them. As they tumbled through the darkness, the chanting grew louder, filling their mind with an overwhelming sense of dread. And then, just as suddenly as the fall had begun, it stopped. Alex landed hard on something solid, the impact knocking the wind out of them. Gasping for breath, they scrambled to their feet, their heart pounding in their chest. They were no longer in the cavern, but somewhere far worse. The walls around them were slick and pulsing, like the inside of some massive, grotesque creature. The floor squelched beneath their feet, oozing with every step. In the distance, they could hear the low, rhythmic chanting still echoing through the air. And in the distance, barely visible in the sickly red glow, stood another figure. This one wasn't like the others. It was taller, more defined, its eyes glowing with a faint, malevolent light. It was watching them, and then it smiled. The figure loomed in the distance, its grin casting a sickening weight over Alex's mind. It wasn't the kind of smile that belonged to a person. It was something grotesque, stretching far too wide across its face. The curve of its lips defied anatomy, almost reaching its ears, and its teeth, jagged and uneven, glinted in the dim, red glow of the strange world. The sight of that impossible smile sent shivers coursing through Alex's body, paralyzing them with fear. The figure stood perfectly still, watching, its eyes faintly glowing with an eerie light. Alex's breath hitched, panic tightening their chest. Every instinct screamed to run, to get away from this thing that seemed to defy all sense of reality. But something in the air, an invisible force, kept them frozen in place, as if the figure's gaze alone had pinned them to the spot. The figure's head tilted to the side, as though it was observing Alex with a cruel curiosity. The smile stretched even wider. Alex's legs finally responded to the surge of fear coursing through them. They turned and bolted, the squelching ground beneath their feet making every step a struggle. The air was thick and heavy, filled with the smell of decay, and it felt like every breath was being filtered through something foul. Behind them, the faint, deliberate tapping of the figure's footsteps followed, too slow to be chasing, but always there. Always just a step behind, as if it knew Alex couldn't outrun it forever. Despite the growing terror, Alex ran faster. They had no idea where they were going, just that they needed to escape the figure's dreadful presence. The tunnel stretched on endlessly, pulsating with a strange, organic rhythm, the walls growing tighter with every step. The ground beneath Alex's feet had turned slick, as if they were running on something far more sinister than stone. Each footfall sent a revolting squelch through the air, the sound blending with the muffled chanting that had returned, growing louder with each passing second. The tunnel suddenly split into two paths, and Alex skidded to a halt, panting. To the left was a steep descent into darkness, narrow and claustrophobic, while the right path led through a corridor lined with strange, pulsing growths, their surface slick with a dark liquid that oozed onto the floor. Neither option offered safety, but the tapping behind them was growing louder. Closer. Without thinking, Alex darted to the right, the thick ooze on the ground sticking to their shoes like tar. The tunnel narrowed as they ran, the walls pressing in, forcing them to crouch, then crawl on hands and knees. The black substance clung to their skin, and the stench of rot grew stronger, making Alex gag. Each movement felt like a struggle, as though the tunnel itself was trying to trap them, hold them in place. The chanting grew louder in their mind, as if it was being whispered directly into their thoughts. Alex shook their head trying to block it out, but it was useless. The words, though incomprehensible, filled their head with a sense of dread that gnawed at their sanity. Suddenly, the tunnel opened up into a massive chamber. Alex scrambled to their feet, gasping for breath. The chamber was far more disturbing than the tunnels. The walls were lined with strange, fleshy sacs, pulsating with a rhythm that matched the ever-present chanting. Dark liquid seeped from the sacs, pooling around Alex's ankles, thick and cold. And in the center of the chamber, Alex saw something that made their stomach lurch. An altar, twisted and organic, its surface covered in blood. It looked as though it had grown out of the very walls, a grotesque blend of flesh and stone, pulsating in time with the chanting. The sight of it filled Alex with a sense of unspeakable dread, a certainty that something horrifying was about to happen. On the altar lay a body, or what was left of one. It was twisted and contorted, barely recognizable as human. The limbs were bent at unnatural angles, and the skin was torn and scarred. Blood soaked the surface of the altar, dripping down the sides and mixing with the black liquid on the floor. Alex's heart raced as they staggered back, their minds struggling to process the horror before them. This wasn't a game. No game could create something so vividly real, so viscerally terrifying. The smell of blood, the sight of torn flesh, it was too much. Alex fell to their knees, retching, the bile rising in their throat. But then, a sound echoed through the chamber. A soft, wet noise like something shifting. Alex's head snapped up, their heart pounding in their ears. The body on the altar twitched. "No," Alex whispered, backing away slowly. "This isn't possible." The body jerked again, a grotesque movement that sent a wave of cold terror through Alex's veins. The head lolled to the side, and for a moment Alex could have sworn its eyes, empty and lifeless, shifted toward them. The chanting grew louder, more insistent, filling the air with its rhythmic pulse. Alex stumbled to their feet, their body trembling with panic. They had to get out of here. Whatever this place was, whatever was happening, they couldn't stay. But just as they turned to run, the soft tapping sound echoed through the chamber again, freezing Alex in place. The figure was there. It was always there, just behind them, moving with that unervingly slow, patient pace. Alex could feel its presence, like a cold breath on the back of their neck. A voice whispered, soft and chilling, "You can't escape." Alex's skin prickled with fear, and without thinking, they bolted again, racing blindly through the chamber. Their feet slipped in the slick, black ooze, every step a struggle to keep moving forward. The chanting grew louder, more frenzied, as if the very walls were singing along, urging Alex deeper into the nightmare. The chamber seemed endless, the walls shifting and pulsating like a living creature. Fleshy growths reached out from the walls, dripping their black liquid onto Alex's skin, burning like acid where it touched. They pushed through the pain, their breath coming in ragged gasps. And then, in the distance, Alex saw it, a faint glimmer of light. Hope flared in their chest, and they sprinted toward it, their legs aching with exhaustion. They just had to reach the light. They just had to escape. But just as Alex neared the opening, something cold wrapped around their ankle, yanking them backward. They hit the ground hard, the black ooze splashing up around them, and for a moment, the wind was knocked from their lungs. Panic surged through them as they kicked and thrashed, trying to break free. A cold hand tightened its grip on their leg, pulling them deeper into the dark. Alex screamed, their mind racing. But no matter how hard they struggled, the hand only pulled harder, dragging them back toward the shadows. "You can't escape," the voice whispered again, this time closer, like it was breathing the words into Alex's ear. Desperate, Alex kicked out with all their strength, the cold grip momentarily loosening. They scrambled forward, their fingers clawing at the ground, but the ooze made it impossible to find any traction. The light ahead was dimming, fading, as if it was slipping further out of reach. And behind them, the figure stood, its glowing eyes watching, its smile impossibly wide. "You'll never escape." Alex's hands scrambled against the slick, pulsating ground, every inch of progress a desperate fight against the cold grip pulling them back. The ooze that covered the floor clung to their body like a living thing, weighing them down, refusing to let go. Their breath came in shallow gasps, panic clawing at their chest. The figure's cold, skeletal hand wrapped tighter around their ankle, its grip sending icy tendrils of fear up their spine. The light ahead, the one glimmer of hope in this nightmare, was growing dimmer by the second, as if it was retreating into the distance. Alex kicked again, managing to loosen the figure's hold for a split second. But it wasn't enough. The cold fingers snaked up their leg, tightening with every second, pulling them inexorably back into the suffocating darkness. "You'll never escape," the figure's voice hissed, closer now, its breath brushing the nape of Alex's neck. Summoning every ounce of strength left, Alex twisted their body and kicked out hard, the heel of their shoe connecting with something solid. The figure let out a low, guttural sound, and for a moment, its grip loosened enough for Alex to wrench free. They scrambled forward, their hands sinking into the thick ooze, every movement a fight against the sticky resistance that surrounded them. The light was fading fast, but Alex couldn't stop. They couldn't think. The only thought that mattered was escape. Behind them, the figure's presence loomed, a heavy, oppressive force that seemed to fill the chamber. Its slow, deliberate footsteps echoed once more, the tap-tap-tap of its approach filling Alex with a growing sense of dread. The figure wasn't chasing. It didn't need to. It knew, just as Alex did, that there was no real escape. Just ahead, the glimmer of light flickered again, weaker now, barely a pinprick of brightness in the overwhelming dark. Alex stretched out their hand toward it, fingers trembling, lungs burning with exhaustion. Almost there. The ground shifted beneath them, and suddenly Alex was falling again. The chamber, the light, the figure. Everything vanished in an instant, replaced by a cold, crushing darkness that enveloped them completely. It felt as though the very air had been sucked out of the space, leaving nothing but a suffocating void. There was no sense of direction, no up or down. Alex's stomach lurched, the sensation of free-falling, disorienting, and terrifying. And then, without warning, they hit something solid. Hard, cold stone. The impact sent a jolt of pain through their body, knocking the breath from their lungs. For a long moment, Alex lay there, gasping for air, disoriented and trembling from head to toe. The darkness was thick, impenetrable, but this time it was different. There was no red glow, no pulsating walls, no sound other than the faint drip of water somewhere far off. The chanting was gone, replaced by an oppressive silence that felt even more dangerous. Alex struggled to their feet, their legs weak and shaky, their minds still reeling from the fall. They reached out into the void, feeling for anything, any sign of where they were. Their fingers brushed cold, damp stone, rough and uneven, like the walls of a cave. Alex ran their hands along the surface, slowly moving forward, feeling their way in the pitch-black darkness. The silence was unnerving. After the relentless chanting and the grotesque, throbbing chambers, this stillness felt wrong, almost as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. Alex's heart pounded in their chest, the sound of their own blood rushing in their ears the only thing breaking the silence. As they moved cautiously through the dark, the floor beneath their feet began to change. The stone grew smoother, colder, until it felt more like polished marble than rough cave walls. Alex's footsteps echoed faintly, the sound bouncing off distant surfaces that they couldn't see. And then, ahead of them, there was a soft flicker of light, just the faintest glow, like a candle barely clinging to life. Alex hesitated, every muscle in their body tense. The light was small and distant, barely illuminating the space around it. But it was something. Anything was better than the crushing darkness. With slow, deliberate steps, Alex made their way toward it, their heart pounding in their chest. The flickering glow revealed a long, narrow hallway, the walls lined with strange symbols etched into the stone. The symbols glowed faintly, pulsing with an eerie, bluish light. The air was colder here, and with each step, Alex felt the temperature drop, the chills sinking into their bones. As they neared the end of the hallway, the source of the light became clear, a single, flickering flame burning atop a stone pedestal. It cast long, distorted shadows across the walls, making the etched symbols seem to writhe and twist like living things. The flame itself was weak, barely holding on, as though a single breath could snuff it out completely. Beyond the pedestal, Alex could make out a doorway, a tall, arched opening leading into yet another chamber. But something was off about it. The doorway was wrong. It shimmered, the edges flickering like static on a broken screen, as though it wasn't entirely stable. The space beyond it was obscured, a swirling mass of shadows that seemed to pulse and shift in time with the faint light from the flame. Instinctively, Alex knew that stepping through that doorway was a point of no return. Something waited on the other side, something far worse than anything they had encountered so far. The air itself seemed to hum with a dark energy, the atmosphere thick with an oppressive weight that pressed down on Alex's chest. They stood frozen for a moment, staring at the doorway. There was no going back. The way they had come had vanished into the void. This was it, the only path left. Swallowing hard, Alex took a tentative step forward, their gaze locked on the shimmering doorway. The light from the flame flickered again, casting strange shadows that danced across the walls, distorting the space around them. The etched symbols seemed to glow brighter, pulsing in time with Alex's heartbeat. Just as they were about to reach the threshold, a voice echoed through the hallway, a voice so soft and distant that at first Alex thought they had imagined it. Alex! They froze, their blood turning to ice. It wasn't the cold, mechanical voice of the figure. This voice was different. It was familiar. Alex, please help. The voice wavered, filled with desperation and fear. It was close now, echoing all around them, bouncing off the stone walls. Who's there? Alex called out, their voice trembling. Who are you? For a long, tense moment, there was only silence. And then the voice returned, fainter now, as though whoever it was had moved further away. You have to find me. Alex's heart raced. Someone else was here, someone trapped in this nightmare, just like they were. The thought gave them a small flicker of hope. If someone else was here, maybe they weren't completely alone. Maybe together, they could find a way out. But the doorway loomed ahead, and something deep in Alex's gut told them that stepping through it meant crossing into something far worse. The voice, whoever it belonged to, seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once, leaving Alex with a terrible choice. With a deep breath, they stepped toward the doorway, the strange energy crackling in the air around them, the pulsing light of the symbols growing more intense. As soon as their foot crossed the threshold, the world lurched violently, like the ground itself had shifted beneath them. The air turned heavy, thick with the scent of burning metal, and the static around the doorway intensified, sending jolts of electric fear through Alex's body. The chamber beyond was a maze of twisted, shifting corridors, the walls warping and bending in impossible directions. The shadows here were alive, moving like liquid, pooling together in dark corners before slithering across the floor. And then, from deep within the shifting corridors, came the sound of footsteps. Not the slow, deliberate tap-tap-tap of the figure, but something heavier, something faster. Alex's pulse quickened. Whatever was in the maze, it was coming. The heavy footsteps reverberated through the shifting corridors, growing louder with each passing second. They echoed in unnatural ways, as if bouncing off walls that didn't quite exist. Alex's heart raced in response, every beat sending fresh waves of panic through their veins. The maze before them twisted and writhed, the walls undulating like living things, pulsing in time with the strange, rhythmic energy that filled the air. The voice, so familiar, so desperate, was gone now, leaving behind only silence and those ominous footsteps. Alex didn't dare call out again. Whoever, or whatever, was approaching didn't sound like someone they wanted to meet. The corridor ahead bent in impossible angles, folding in on itself, the floor rolling like a wave. Alex's stomach churned at the sight of it, but there was no turning back now. They had crossed the threshold. This was the only path left. They moved cautiously, stepping into the maze, their shoes sticking to the slick, warped ground. The air felt heavy, pressing down on their shoulders as though the weight of this twisted dimension itself was bearing down on them. Every breath was a struggle, the air thick with the scent of burning metal and something else, something far worse, like decay mixed with electricity. The footsteps had stopped, but the silence that followed was far more terrifying. It was a thick, oppressive silence, the kind that made Alex feel like they were being watched. Their gaze darted back and forth, scanning the shifting shadows that slithered along the walls. They knew something was there, lurking just out of sight. But they had to move. Staying still wasn't an option. Taking slow, deliberate steps, Alex pressed deeper into the maze, their heartbeat loud in their ears. The corridor narrowed as they walked, the walls pressing in on either side until they were forced to turn sideways to squeeze through the tight space. The dark liquid that had oozed across the floor of the previous chamber was here too, seeping from the cracks in the walls, coating Alex's hands and clothes with its cold, sticky residue. A low, vibrating hum filled the air, the sound pulsing through the walls, like a heartbeat coming from somewhere deep within the maze. Alex could feel it vibrating through their bones, a constant thrum that seemed to grow louder the further they ventured. It was as if the very maze itself was alive, guiding them towards something or someone. Then, abruptly, the narrow passage opened up into a large, circular room. The walls here were smoother, more polished, though still organic in appearance, almost like the inside of some massive, living creature. In the center of the room stood a massive structure, twisting and pulsing with a faint, sickly glow. It was similar to the tree-like formation Alex had seen in the previous chamber, but this one was far more elaborate, its roots sprawling out across the floor, stretching into the dark corners of the room. At its core, embedded deep within the twisted roots, was a pulsing heart-like mass, glowing with an ominous red light. The sight of it sent a chill down Alex's spine. It looked alive, throbbing with an unnatural energy, each pulse reverberating through the room like a drumbeat. Alex took a step closer, their eyes locked on the glowing heart. Something about it called to them, a strange magnetic pull that made their skin crawl. But as they drew nearer, they noticed something else, something that made their breath catch in their throat. There was a figure, half embedded in the roots of the grotesque structure. At first, Alex thought it was just another part of the twisted mass, another face trapped within the pulsating nightmare. But no, this was different. It was a person. Their body was entangled in the roots, limbs twisted at unnatural angles, their face obscured by the dark tendrils that clung to their skin. Their chest rose and fell weakly, the faintest sign of life. Whoever they were still breathing. Alex's mind raced. Was this the voice they had heard? Was this person the one calling for help? "Hey," Alex whispered, taking a cautious step forward. "Can you hear me?" The person didn't respond. Their body remained still, the slow rise and fall of their chest the only indication that they were still alive. The roots seemed to tighten around them, pulsing in rhythm with the glowing heart above. Alex's heart pounded in their chest. They needed to get this person out, whoever they were. But as they reached for the roots, something strange happened. The air around the structure shimmered, and for a split second, the entire room seemed to flicker, like static on a broken television screen. A voice crackled through the air, distorted and faint but unmistakable. "Don't touch it." Alex froze, their hand hovering just above the roots. The voice was faint, barely audible, but it sounded familiar. Too familiar. It was their own voice. "What the?" Alex whispered, stepping back in confusion. Their mind reeled, trying to make sense of what they had just heard. How could it be their voice? It didn't make any sense. Before they could process the thought, the figure in the roots stirred. Slowly, painfully, they lifted their head, revealing a face that sent a jolt of pure terror through Alex's body. It was them. The figure embedded in the roots had Alex's face, pale, gaunt, and twisted with pain, but unmistakably their own. Their eyes were hollow, dark voids that seemed to stare right through Alex, as if they were looking at something far beyond. "No, no, this can't be real," Alex stammered, stumbling back in horror. "This isn't possible." The figure, the other Alex spoke, their voice a broken, rasping whisper. "You have to stop it." Alex shook their head, panic rising in their chest. "What are you talking about? What is this? What's happening?" The other Alex's mouth twitched, forming words with difficulty. "The heart, it controls everything. You have to destroy it before it destroys you." Alex's eyes snapped to the pulsing, red mass at the center of the structure. The heart. It throbbed with an unnatural energy, sending ripples of power through the room with every pulse. It was the source of everything, the maze, the twisted corridors, the figure that had been following them. Somehow, Alex knew it was true. The heart was the key to it all. But how could they destroy it? The roots wrapped around it like armor, pulsing in time with its beats. Alex's mind raced, trying to think of a way to break through, to stop whatever nightmare had trapped them here. Suddenly, the air grew colder, and a familiar sound echoed through the room. The slow, deliberate tap-tap-tap of footsteps. Alex's blood ran cold. The figure was back. The other Alex's eyes widened with fear, and their voice became more urgent, though still faint. "It's coming. You have to act now." Alex turned, scanning the room for anything they could use to destroy the heart. But there was nothing, no weapon, no tool, just the pulsing, organic mass and the sound of approaching footsteps growing louder. "You don't have much time," the other Alex whispered, their voice fading. "Please destroy it." Alex's heart pounded in their chest, panic and desperation threatening to overwhelm them. The figure was almost there, its presence filling the room, its glowing eyes boring into their back. With a surge of adrenaline, Alex lunged toward the heart, hands outstretched. The air crackled with static, the room flickering as they reached for the pulsating mass. Their fingers brushed the surface, and an electric shock jolted through their body, sending them reeling backward. The heart pulsed harder, faster, as though it sensed the danger. The walls of the room trembled, the roots tightening around the other Alex, who let out a pained gasp. The figure was almost upon them now, its cold breath brushing the back of Alex's neck. There was no time, no more chances. With a final, desperate cry, Alex grabbed a shard of stone from the ground, sharp, jagged, and drove it into the heart with all their strength. The room exploded with light. The heart let out a deafening scream, a sound that reverberated through the entire maze, shaking the walls, tearing through the very fabric of the nightmare. The roots writhed and twisted, thrashing violently as the heart's red glow flickered, then dimmed. The figure let out a low, guttural hiss, its eyes narrowing in fury as the light swallowed the room. Alex felt the ground give way beneath them, and for a moment, everything was weightless, suspended in the blinding brilliance. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light was gone. Alex lay on the cold, hard floor, gasping for breath. The chamber was dark, silent, the oppressive presence of the maze finally gone. They were alone. Slowly, painfully, Alex rose to their feet. The heart was gone, reduced to a pile of ash, its twisted roots withering into dust. The other Alex had vanished, leaving nothing behind but the faint memory of their words. Alex stumbled forward, their legs weak, their mind numb. The nightmare was over, or at least this part of it was. But deep down, they knew that whatever had happened here wasn't truly gone. It was only the beginning.